Welcome back to Outdoor Adventures Podcast. Today is Shad Fishing 101. It's Sam and Charlie again today, and we're just going to talk through shad fishing, another relatively cheap activity to do. I wouldn't say a kid activity just because of where the fishing occurs. The currents are a little bit swift. So it's more for someone, probably an adult or, teenage or older, or somebody that can be a little more responsible around fast-moving water.
Yeah.
It wouldn't hurt to have a life jacket for this activity. Those nice ones that you pull the tab if you go in. It's not going to impede you while you're fishing, but if you did go into the Columbia River basin, it would be nice to have a life jacket.
Mm-hmm.
So mostly this is done on the Columbia River here in Oregon. You can fish shad from the Washington side as well. And how we got started on it was my friend Bill Higbee and a couple other buddies. We were up walleye fishing, and we were coming home, and we saw all these guys just lining up on the banks by the Columbia River by Bonneville Dam, and we didn't know what they were doing. And we walked in there and just took a look, and we saw all these fish everywhere. We're like, man, maybe we should try this. This could be fun. And so we started on YouTube, and we just watched other guys shad fishing and kind of picked up the gear and converted some of our other fishing poles. And Charlie, you came with us for the first time last year.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, you outfished me the day you came, which really kind of pissed me off. But,
yeah, I'm pretty good.
Yeah. But I was happy. I was happy to get some shad on the bank because I didn't have it that day. So, a basic fishing license, if you're a resident of Oregon, is $44. If you're a non-resident, it's $110.50. So you do need to have a fishing license. You don't need the Columbia River endorsement. That's only required for salmon, steelhead, and sturgeon on the Columbia. So for shad, you would just need that resident angling license. There are some free fishing weekends when the shad are running as well. So the shad run is typically from June to late July, and there are a couple free fishing weekends in there, at least one every year, where you could go catch them for free. So there is no limit to shad. You can catch as many as you want. There's no size restrictions, so you can just have at it. I haven't tried eating them yet. I've seen some recipes with Instapots where you put all kinds of different, seasonings in there, kind of make a fish stew. But as we alluded to in the crabbing 101, the smells. I've heard the guys that use their Instapot, that becomes the only use for that Instapot is cooking shad. So
yeah,
they're real oily, real bony fish, but they're good size. I mean, you catch a big one, and it's probably 3-4 pounds.
Yeah,
little torpedo, and they fight pretty well. They have really soft mouths though, so they're easy to lose. But anyways, the basic setup that we fish with is we take our steelhead gear typically, so an 8 to 9 foot rod with either a bait caster or a spinning reel. Like my winter steelhead gear, I typically have not monofilament. I can't even think of what it's called, like a P-line type of line on there for bobber fishing for steelhead. And so I don't like that. I like a monofilament for shad. And so I typically convert over to a monofilament line, anywhere from 8 to 12 pound main line. And you could go up to 20 if you wanted to, but you're fishing in fairly fast water. And then I fish a leader, either 6 to 10 pound leader. Even a 12, if you had a 20 pound main line, you could put a 12 pound leader on there. The drawback is the heavier you go, if you do get hung up, it's going to be harder to break that line. And so you're fishing right below Bonneville is where we've always done it. And there's a bunch of other guys out there, so you'll find them. But there's lots of different spots to fish. And the first year I did it, Bill and I were in some really fast water. And so what was fun about that is if you got into a fish, you were fighting the current too. It was a lot of work just to get the fish to the bank. And we had a blast doing it. But we've learned as we've gone back the last couple of seasons to get a little further down stream so the current's not quite so extreme. And it's a little more enjoyable, a little easier on your arms. And so the basic setup is you've got that, 8 to 9 foot steelhead rod with, say up to 20 pound main line. And then I typically do either a snap swivel or a barrel swivel. And if I'm doing the snap swivel, I'm going to put a pencil lead on there, varying from, half ounce to maybe 1.5 ounces, depending on the current. And this is a lead weight. If I don't want to go pencil lead, I'm using like those round slider leads, or they have these little rubber balls that you can kind of clip on there. And so whatever your weight preference is, I mean, you can go look at the weights at, the different outdoor stores and figure out what you want to do. But you want to buy a fair amount of gear because you are going to lose some gear. Mm-hmm. And then we typically are using shad darts, which you can Google shad darts. They're easy to find. They come in all kinds of different colors. I like the gold ones, the pink ones, the red ones. You can also use just a jig head that has kind of like an eye, like an egg replica kind of situation, but without putting an actual jig on there. So it's just basically a bare hook with a little bit of color on there. And leader length anywhere from 2 feet to probably 3 feet, maybe even 40 inches on your leader length. And you're tying that on that barrel swivel or that snap swivel, and you're casting it upstream and letting it float downstream. And when it's on, I mean, you're hooking a fish every other cast or every cast.
Yeah. And the shad darts are pretty cheap, if I remember right. They're only a couple bucks each, I think.
Yeah, a couple bucks. And I just have a setup tackle box just for my shad gear, and I put all my weights in there and my leaders and the darts, and that's all you need.
And you definitely want a variety of weights. Because I remember when we went last year, it was like you'd have a 1/2 ounce on and you'd catch nothing. And then you had to switch to 1 ounce, and then you were catching them. Or vice versa. It just kind of depends on what the current's doing that day. And I don't know, it seemed very important what weight you had on.
Yeah, definitely. And so of the fisheries we have in Oregon, shad is probably our largest quantity of fish that comes in. So during the season, we get 5 to 6 million shad that come in between June and July. And at the peak of the run, you're getting 200,000 to 300,000 fish per day coming in. And so I always watch the fish counts, and you can just Google Bonneville Dam fish counts and find what's happening. And they're up to the minute, and they'll tell you what's up. And so you can kind of see, okay, there'll be a 25,000 fish day, and then the next day is 45,000, and the next day is maybe 60,000. So if I see a few good days in a row, that's when I call Bill and say, hey, it's time to go shad fishing, Mm-hmm. And we head up there. You have to go through the security at Bonneville Dam, so you can't get there before they open. So you can also Google that time. I don't remember if it's 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning, but they'll let you in. You just tell them you're fishing. You definitely want probably 3 or 4 or 5 gallon buckets to put your fish in, because the bank access it's a fairly steep access. So you're typically walking down some rocky terrain, but you need those buckets to throw your fish in. Bring spare line. You want to bring a spare reel probably. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, you really can get into the fish. And for us, we use them for crab bait. So we had talked about crabbing on our last one-on-one episode. And, we stockpile our freezer. We usually do it over a couple days in a row. And we usually come home with anywhere from 60 to 85 shad.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, the thing I really enjoyed about shad fishing is, I like to get out there and fish, but I'm not somebody who's really content with sitting out there fishing all day and catching nothing. So, shad, if the numbers are good and you check the numbers, you're absolutely going to catch shad. No question about it. If your technique isn't as good as the person next to you, you're going to catch less, but you're going to catch some. And they fight super good. Pound for pound, it's a really fun fish to catch.
Yeah, and you're getting you do lose some right at the bank because of, like I was saying, that soft mouth. You'll get them and you'll be prepared to kind of yard them in. And as soon as you're lifting them up, they just pop off. Mm-hmm. So you lose a fair amount of fish, but you're definitely going to get a lot of activity. And what's funny is that you'll see these guys around you that probably have been doing it for 10, 15 years. And I mean, they are so good at it that, I mean, they're hooking a fish every cast.
Yeah, the guy right next to us last year, Let's Go Brandon was his name. He was incredible. I mean, I tried to mimic everything he was doing, and he didn't look like he was doing anything special. Had the same gear as us. Looked at what weight he had on there. We did the same thing, but I mean, every cast he had a fish.
Yeah, he was on fire. And we talked to him for a little bit, and he was going to go steelhead fishing that morning, and the steelhead fishing was slow. So, but he already had his freezer was full, so he was just giving the shad to anybody that wanted them. But he was yarding in fish after fish after fish.
Yeah,
and they're a fun fish to catch. They're kind of cool looking too. I think kind of a pretty fish, if you will. But I think a lot of people in Oregon just don't fish for them. Like, it's just not something like, I don't know, considered a trophy, I guess. So people, whereas a salmon or steelhead, it's a great fish to eat. Everybody wants to go catch one of those. So I think that's why most people don't eat shad. So they're not as excited about it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would say though, they do make an excellent crab bait. I can't think of anything that's worked better than shad. And it makes it really quick to bait your pots for crabbing. Super easy, especially if they're frozen, just poke a hole in them, throw a bait hook through, and
or throw them in a cage. And we always cut some slots in them just so some of that oil can kind of leach into the water, if you will. The other thing I would say about them is they're really good for oversized sturgeon fishing. So a lot of guys that fish for the oversized fish up by Bonneville, they use the bigger shad, and they put them on the bottom and catch a 9.5-foot sturgeon. So I would say the first year I went, there was either a sea lion or a sturgeon. So I was catching fish on every cast. We'd had probably 20, 25 fish on the bank. And then all of a sudden I'd hook a fish, and 2 seconds later my line would snap. And I knew something was grabbing them, but I didn't know what it was. And I lost 4 fish in a row, and I go, okay, it's time to go. So it was either I think sea lion most likely, because I don't think a sturgeon would be a repeat offender, So I think it was definitely a sea lion who had just clued in on, when this guy hooks a fish, it's going to be a whole lot easier for me, So you'd be fighting that fish, bringing it in, and all of a sudden something would grab a hold and snap. So anyway. Well, I don't know what else to say about shad fishing. We could elaborate on just another easy fish to go after. Oh, one thing is, if you are going to do some fishing with kids, if they're under the age of 12, they don't need a fishing license. So anyone under 12 can fish for free. I wouldn't say shad's a good one to start kids on. Our dad kind of started us on bluegill as a starting point for fishing. And bobber fishing, to me, is a great way to start with a kid. And it's a really easy thing to do. You can buy a very cheap, package of bobbers. I like the yellow and orange ones, or the red and white ones, as the old classic bobber, right? And just tie a small hook, go out and get some worms, go to any lake or pond, and play with the depth of your bobber a little bit, but throw that thing out there and you're going to catch some bluegill or crappie, maybe a bass. And I feel like that's a great way to get kids started, because they have something visual. They can watch that bobber, and get excited about it. And I remember bluegill days with our dad where we'd get into a fair amount of fish, and obviously it's a catch and release concept generally. You're not typically going to bring bluegill home. So
unless you want to stock your above ground pool with them.
Yeah. We did do that one time growing up. We did put some fish in our above ground pool. That way we'd have something to fish for in the off season. I'm not sure the legalities of that.
Yeah, I don't know.
It was a different time.
It was a different time.
We weren't releasing them into any other body of water.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But, get your kids out doing something. And fishing is an activity that still relatively low cost compared to going to like the state fair or going to a theme park or going to a movie even. I mean, you're going to spend more money on popcorn, drinks, and food when you go to a movie than you will on a fishing license, and you don't need one for kids. So
Yeah.
and Oregon does a lot of cool events. We do a lot of free fishing weekends, and they'll stock different things with trout, and those are all advertised in the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife website. And you can take kids, and that's a really good. When my kids were first starting fishing, we would go to those events, and I mean, we grew up fishing, so it wasn't like I needed the training of how to catch a fish, but it was just I knew there'd be a good opportunity for the kids to catch something. And I think the important thing when you're taking a kid fishing is helping them find success right away. The drawback to that is then they expect to just hammer the fish every time you go.
Mm-hmm.
So then, you go somewhere and you're having a slower day and you're 15 minutes in and the kids are going, how come we haven't caught something yet? So, but yeah, that's all I got for shad fishing.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's really not the best activity for kids, shad fishing. It's a specific area. It's kind of a treacherous area. And I think that's not your introductory fishing you want to do. But
yeah, there's some logs that come down, you have these big logs that you have to work around sometimes that are, and depending on what the currents are doing, how much water they're letting out of the dam, it can get real crazy. I mean, those logs can get rocking and you've got a fish on and you're trying to get it past a log jam. It's definitely not a kid activity.
No, but it's a good time.
Yeah. All right, we'll get out there, get shad, and